I want to thank everybody for signing on, coming in. We're thrilled to have Max and Drew and Karen presenting tonight. A couple of thank yous that we always like to do to the folks over at B&H Camera, Pro Photo Daily, headed by Jeff Roberts and Jeffrey Schonauer, an American photographer, the folks at Photo Shelter, and Epson. Can't thank everybody enough for their continued support for our endeavor. Just so everyone knows, in regards to the video submissions that we've put out, we've extended the deadline to June 5th. So we're hoping that we can get even more submissions for our video night of listening to the folks who've kept us all operating during the virus and this quarantine. Anything you could do as far as that video piece would be great. If you have questions, you can call me. Glenn, don't call me. Glenn Backen. But otherwise, we're set up for June 10th is our next projections, which everyone will get notices for very soon. And tonight we have Drew, Gurian, we have Karen Zusman, and we start off with Max Hirshfeld. So Max, the screen is yours.
Great. Hi everybody. And Cliff, I'm not going to share my screen until we're ready. I'll let you know.
That's totally fine. Yeah, you can give us a quick intro, give us a background, and you can share your screen when you're ready to present.
Okay. Hi everybody. My name's Max Hirshfeld. I live in Washington, D.C. First out, a shout for Frank and for Cliff for keeping this thing moving. It's really, in some ways, a more deeper experience by doing this virtually. So I commend you for doing this and thank you for inviting me. I'm going to give everybody a quick background check on me. I've been in Washington since the 70s. I went to college here. I was fortunate in my senior year at GW to land a position at the Smithsonian at the ripe old age of 22, and I stayed at the National Portrait Gallery for a year, and then I was 5 years at the National Zoo as staff photographer. In 1977, I attended the University of Missouri Photojournalism Workshop. And if you're not familiar with that, it is probably, and it's still in existence, it's the real granddaddy outward bound of photo workshops. So when I got back from that, I was convinced that I was going to go after a position at a small newspaper somewhere in America and become a serious photojournalist. But that didn't quite happen. And then in 1978, I left the zoo and I went out on my own, and I've been in Washington shooting for advertising, design, and editorial clients for quite a while. I'm going to fast forward to 1993. Both of my parents survived Auschwitz. And in 1993, I escorted my mother to Poland for her first return in 46 years. And I documented the trip, not really knowing what I was going to do with the work, but it was an opportunity to utilize some of the thoughts and responses to my work that I had received at the photojournalism workshop at University of Missouri.
Yes,
So,
Max, what was the impetus to say, "Ma, let's go"? Was it your mother wanting to go? Did you push her to go? What made you guys get on that plane?
well, it was really her idea. It was her discussion with me for quite a while. My dad passed 12 years prior to that. And I think because she went through a lot of problems and changes in her life after he passed, that she was, in her words, she wanted to show me where she was from before she passed away. So when we went in 93, she was 75 years old. So to be honest with you, and all you photographers out there know that if you're presented with something like that and you can get past the emotional shock in the beginning, I saw it very quickly as a pretty profound gift. So it was really her idea, Frank, but I wouldn't have let her go by herself, which she probably would have considered.
Okay.
So I'm going to fast forward again because tonight I'm going to share with you the book that I've created that was sparked by that journey. And to be honest with you, the book, which is right here, I'm going to show you a copy of it. It's called Sweet Noise, Love in Wartime. It's a 200-page book published at the end of last year by Damiani Editore in Bologna. And I spent a long, long time on this project. And I'm telling you all this because if you saw the stack of rejection slips that I have from various and sundry publishers, I probably could have a separate book just of those rejection letters. So, but I pursued this thing, and throughout my career, I would put the book away for a while, never really being sure if it was a book or not. In 2003, maybe 2004, I finally opened that box that my mother told me to take and put away somewhere, and I ignored it. And in the box was another small box where there were hundreds of letters that my parents had written to each other after the war. I'm going to give you a quick rundown. They met in a Polish ghetto. Both went to Auschwitz. Both survived death marches and Auschwitz, met in Western Europe. And subsequently, because of the visa structure in the world at that point, they decided to separate because my mother had a visa that would take her to the United States. 3 years passed, and they ended up writing letters to each other. So when I found these letters, I realized that the book that I thought I was going to be able to make after all those years finally had something much, much deeper than just my photographs and my time with her on our own in Poland for that short visit. So I want to share the book with you tonight. And the reason I'm doing this is mostly because this has become my obsession for a long time, and it's finally become a reality. But I also am going to try and share the book as best I can through this technology. Now, I know you all can't quite experience it, but the book is a combination of three things. It's about 90 letters that they wrote to each other, edited, first translated, then edited. It's a continuous memoir of me going through this process of trying to understand what it's like to have grown up in the shadow of the Holocaust, and my photographs that I took of my mother now 27 years ago. So I think I'm going to share the screen and we can get started on this.
Is your mom still with us, Max?
No, she passed in 99.
Okay.
Let's see. What am I looking for?
So you're just going to click share screen on the bottom there.
Yeah, but that's just my desktop. Oh, there we go. Okay. Sorry, guys. Okay.
Click on that first slide. There you go.
All right. I'm going to move through this at a pretty steady pace. Anybody has any questions, please let me know or let Cliff know. I'm going to pause a couple times, and I also want to read a small passage from the book when we get to a certain place, but let's proceed. The first few frames are pulled from a video that we created for the Kickstarter that I built back in the fall, which was a successful funding opportunity to create this book. So I've pulled a few images. This gives you an idea of some of the letters. This is the binding of the book, obviously, and then the cover of the book. And as I mentioned, I want to sort of move through this as you would experience were you looking at the book. I'm going to leave this up for a minute. I'll tell you a quick story. I found this poem in the New Yorker several years ago, and it's written by the recently deceased, probably poet laureate of Israel. And it's kind of a tremendous consolidation of all the emotions and memories that I think are in this book. If you're familiar with Auschwitz, this is a barracks at Birkenau, which was the main killing center built, sometimes referred to as Auschwitz II. In the central camp of Auschwitz, in the basement, there were things called standing cells. And there were boxes, vertical boxes built to put prisoners into. So this is peering through a keyhole, a peephole into one of these cells. This is a picture of my parents after the war. And this is important, and this is really powerful to me as well as I hope others, because it speaks volumes to me about what life may have been like on the streets of Brussels soon after the war. And if you look around the edges of the frame, there's quite a bit of other storytelling that we could do. David Skolkin is the designer of the book, and he's one of the most talented men on the planet. So we agreed after many years of working together on this that it would be smart to sort of help pace the book through moving through photographs. Some are double trucked, some are single image, some are stacked on a page, and then interspersing those photographs with text. So I mentioned the letters to the book. There are hundreds of letters that we had to go through, and I had to have translated and then narrowed down and edited. So I wanted to give everybody a sense of how we dealt with the letters on the page. The first third of the book is taken up with letters, and David had the brilliant idea of isolating the color choice so that we have a very simple 3% yellow gain in the background to indicate that you're in a different area of the story. And then my father's letters are in a sort of a brown, reddish brown type, and my mother's are in a brighter red type. So I'm not going to show you too many letters or ask you to spend time reading them here, because I will say one thing, they're pretty powerful.
Max, if you could share with us, what is it like to do this journey with your mom? Like when like you first get there and when you're continuing the process, what did she share with you that was something you weren't expecting, or just what are the emotions you go through doing something like this with her?
Boy, well, I used the book, and I talk about this with my wife and my family and friends, that I never had gone through any therapy. And I think that there's a relatively high degree of children of survivors and even grandchildren of survivors who have gone to therapy. So I ended up spending all these years writing the story. And in the writing, Frank, is when I started to reflect on my thoughts as we were traveling in Poland. I'll be honest with you, my memories are glued to the photographs and linked to the photographs. So therefore, I have it's probably going to be easier for you to see this in my text and read this than for me to isolate any one thing. You know, I'll say one thing about this also, and I write about it, that we photographers have an amazing tool in our hands, but it also works as a shield, so that if you're confronted with the types of things that I think I was viewing, I could take pictures and think about them later.
Okay.
So this will show you a little bit of sense of the different color type. Most of the letters that my parents wrote to each other were either on the old-fashioned par avion folded Air Express letters or with whatever was handy. So in the middle of the 3 years my parents were separated, my mother went back to Paris to be with my father, and then went on to Poland to put a gravestone in the cemetery of the woman who raised her, who was her aunt. Now, this is not in the book, but I'm especially infatuated with it because it's, you know, it's one of those passports that tell us a lifetime. The very last letter in the book is really part of the story of the letters and the story of my father's time in Paris because, and this is a very strong statement about the power of the press, after years of trying to get through the immigration system and being thwarted at every turn, he was finally approached by a couple who lived in Paris and wrote for the man wrote for the Saturday Evening Post. And they did a long feature piece about my parents. It was called Uncle Sam Breaks Up a Home. And so quickly after that, you can probably tell from the letter on the right, his visa came through and he could finally come to America in 1949. So we divide the book. There's only one color photo in the whole book, and this is in the bedroom of an apartment of a woman that my mother was friends with that we visited. So to answer your question a little bit, Frank, as a photographer who loves to be excited by new places, being in Warsaw and being in Poland with a simple camera and a bag full of Tri-X, I was impressed with the vibrancy of the city. I'm going to show a little bit of that here. This is the site of the Warsaw Ghetto, where there's a pretty substantial park. This is a skylight in one of the barracks at Birkenau, and I'm showing you this picture in this forum and then how we used it in the book to give you hopefully a better sense of how the book flows and how my text is incorporated in the book. Before World War II, there were over 400 synagogues and places of Jewish places of worship in Warsaw. After the war, there was one, and that's this place. It's called Noziki. And the Gestapo used Noziki to house their horses during the war and the occupation of Poland. So this one was, it had come back, you know, as a place of worship. You know, if you know a little bit about the requirements of holding Friday night and Saturday prayers, you know, you need what's called a minyan, and you need 10 men. So I believe I was the 10th man in this shot. And if you look closely, that's my mother in the top left corner, because this was, of course, an Orthodox synagogue. So men and women were separated. This is a exhibition or exhibit at the Warsaw Jewish Cemetery, which is a sort of embedded photographs that people had supplied. I think there's a couple of Roman Vishniak photographs in here as well. So we were on a bit of a trek. We went from, this is in the cemetery in Warsaw. We were looking for information on the city of Radom, where we went next. But on the way out, we stopped at another woman's apartment who was a survivor. And my mother had never met her, but it was pretty emotional. So Frank, I hope this will answer a little bit of the questions of what I was seeing through the camera.
It certainly does.
These are the children of that woman. And so after I took this picture, you know, it dawned on me that they too were children of a survivor, but they didn't survive the war. So we went to the city of Radom. My mother's father, who she never knew, was from Radom, which is a city about an hour from Warsaw. And we went to the Jewish cemetery there. And this man, I have no idea who this is, but I was pretty taken with his face. So to give you an idea of the scale of the Jewish cemetery in Radom, and if you've read about how the Nazis came into a lot of cities and towns, they took all the headstones from the graves and paved streets and patios and sidewalks with those gravestones. In this particular cemetery, and I keep in mind, this is not a very big city, a lot of those stones had been brought back, but of course you could never put them where they rightfully belong, so they were stacked up in the middle of the cemetery. So my mother was born in a very small town called Opatov, and I want to just read two paragraphs from my book, and as we look at these three photos. She began to speak, and as she described her aunts on their hands and knees, scrubbing the now rotting steps leading to the second floor, it seemed that her persona had altered, transformed by the kind of fleeting memory that leaves before it fully arrives. Suddenly she was grasping for words. With no vegetation in sight and just a few cracked tiles covered by the sooty evidence of where the coal was stored, the courtyard felt like a haunted place. Above us, the sky had turned a milky white, suffusing the space with a silent glow. I asked her to stay in the center of the courtyard as I started shooting. She became riveted to the spot, seemingly unaware of me. Moving closer with my camera, I watched a great sorrow come across her face. She bit her lower lip and began to cry. Rather than consoling her, I photographed the moment, bearing my sense of duty as her son in a split second of selfishness, silently welcoming the raw emotion. I hadn't been able to predict the nature of the images I might find in Poland. I only hoped to be able to respond without hesitation. Watching my mother wrestle with her memories seemed to suck the air from my lungs. The camera was all that held me in place. We moved from there to the town that my mother was raised in, and we went to the building where her aunt and uncle had an apartment on the second floor. The woman on the left, holding the small dog, refused to believe that Jews had ever lived in the building. So, as my mother did in other places, she showed her tattoo from Auschwitz.
Max, can you share with us a little bit of what this journey, as your mom was going through it, were there any new revelations? Was there anger? Was there more sadness? Like, what did she get out of it?
I think she was, after so many years in the United States, she was shocked at kind of the primitive nature of being in this place that she didn't remember so well. I think that her emotions were much more visible in her face, as in this picture, than me remembering, because I'll be honest with you, I made a mistake in this process. I didn't take along a tape recorder. And I think that would have not only helped record what she might have been saying, but it would also would have helped prompt me to ask the right questions.
Yeah.
We went looking for her aunt's grave and we couldn't find it. But this will give you an idea of an untouched Jewish cemetery in Poland. We stopped in Krakow for a couple of days before we went to Auschwitz, to give you an idea. You know, I'm a people photographer, so I'm fascinated with human interaction. Give you another idea of how the book is set up. This is the closest I've ever gotten to being with Brian Ferry in a bedroom. So the last few frames are from Auschwitz, and again, if anyone's familiar with it or not familiar with it, Auschwitz is two different camps. the original camp, which was a set of very sturdy brick buildings, about 15 or so, that were Polish soldier barracks. And the Germans took over this facility and added a floor to each building. So they're two-story buildings. This is in one of them, leading down toward the lower level. And you've probably all seen there's a track that comes into Birkenau that comes through a gateway, archway in the building, and ends about midway down the field. And she's standing on the tracks there. And at the end of the line is something called the Judenramp, which was where the Jews were hauled off the trains and sent to die or sent to work.
Max, maybe you can share, when you guys came home,
Mm-hmm.
what did did she share with you what did this trip mean to her? Was there a closure? Was there anything that she shared with you, like, Max, thanks for doing that with me?
Well, yeah, I think she certainly said thanks. I wish I could give you a concise answer. And I think your question is related to your first question and your subsequent questions. That the ability to consolidate your thoughts and your senses after something like this, I think are much more difficult for somebody.
Mm.
So that's really it.
That's an amazing body of work, Max.
Thank you.
And where can we get the book?
The book is right here. We have a dedicated website for the book. This is the easiest way to get a copy. It's also available at your local Walmart through all the big granddaddy things like Barnes and Noble and Amazon.
Yes,
But we like it if you go to the website. It tells a little bit more of the story. There's a video in there that we produced that talks a little bit more about the making of the book. So I think this would be probably the best way.
Francis has a question. What do you feel like you learned most from doing a project like this?
I think that I learned that if I was smarter when I was younger, I would pay more attention to the stories that my parents had inside their memories. And I say that, I don't mean to be blithe about it, but I think that all of us have family that we can tap. And whether it's a story about coming to America, whether it's a story about the dream of America, whether it's a story of something as simple as how my grandfather taught me how to fish, it struck me after doing this, and especially after working for so long on this book, that there is something intrinsic in the continuity of family. So I think that really is what I came away with.
I think a lot of us fall victim to waiting too long to hear the stories, or
Yes.
not to tape them, not to photo, not to write them down. I think we all make that mistake on one level or another.
Yeah, I think that was probably the most important thing that I came out of this with. Ultimately, Frank, this is quite a gift I got, and the trip itself was a gift, but finding the letters and then realizing that they both had to be shared with the world has stuck with me for a long time, and I think that's what propelled me to bring it to fruition. before it got too late.
Well, Max, from everyone's reaction, they're just blown away by your story. So I cannot thank you enough for opening your heart and opening your book to us. It's you've already made it a very, very special night. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I'm honored to be here, and thanks everybody. And I look forward to the next presentation.
Great, thank you, Max. All right, so we'll take a minute or two break, and we have Karen Zusman up next. So go grab a glass of water, and we'll be right back.
All right. I think we are back here. This is a good time to mention the next projections event is going to be on June 10th. Just want to let everyone know that was just a live copy of the website. So feel free to go to projections.live if you guys want to check out more. You can RSVP there, as well as see photos from all the previous presenters, including the presentations that we have here. And also know that this is being recorded. So you can always take a look at the video we posted live on YouTube. And it's also going to be on our website, www.projections.live, not com, projections.live. So we have, Frank, how many do we have? 60, 70 presenters over the years? We have quite a few.
Over the years, we're close to 300.
Yeah. But I'm saying as far as the documented photos, if you go to the website, you'll see a whole list of at least 60 or 70 artists. Incredible work there. Yeah. So check that out. June 10th is going to be the next one. And I think it's a good time to introduce our next incredible presenter, Karen.
You're up, Karen.
Karen, I'm going to unmute you. There you go.
And can everybody see me? Let me just, okay. Now, is that,
you can share your screen.
right, hold on just a sec, sorry. Okay. Does everyone see that?
Yep, that's great.
Good.
Wonderful. So that is a really tough act to follow, Max. Wow, that was incredible story. I think the only way I can follow it is by referencing something you said to us right before this talk started, which was you said that this is really a love story. So I guess I can say that what I'm about to show is a different kind of love story. It's new work for me, and it's called The Beauty Still. I have always loved my city, but never more than now. And these are visual stories from the first 6 weeks of the pandemic here in Brooklyn, New York, where I live. And I just want to start by thanking Frank and Cliff for reaching out to me to do this. Mostly people know my work in Cuba, and I have only started shooting on the streets of New York, even though I've lived here for more than 25 years, just last summer. And I think it was really this time working remote, because I still have a day job, but I think having that has been a wonderful counterbalance, because every free moment I have, I'm rushing, I'm jumping on my bike to go shoot what's happening. And I just want to shout out to my friend, Bill Buchan, who said to me when I was complaining, I can't shoot, I'm working. And he said, come on, this is your moment. So thank you, Bill, for that. I'm just going to quickly read something I wrote about this series, and then I'll jump in. I think the gravity of the situation truly hit me in early April when cycling on 2nd Avenue in South Brooklyn. I saw a long rectangular wooden box propped up on an accordion stand on the side of the road, flanked by 2 large white trucks. I remember riding by and wondering, could that be a coffin? Could those be refrigerated trucks? There was a hospital nearby, and while my images aren't great due to the distance I kept, I will never forget the feeling that shot through me when I witnessed patients being brought in, their hands gripping tightly the hands of the EMTs never flinching. Each day after I stopped by the hospital, I continued on to the Verrazano Bridge area, the glorious expanse of waterfront between Bay Ridge leading up to Coney Island. Once ordinary human gestures took on a lyric preciousness to me. The beauty was a bittersweet balm. There was a delicateness within our newfound vulnerability. People, bridges, puddles, pigeons, and trees appeared to shimmer. Everything lost its solidity. Of course, it was the clear, early spring light. But it was also something else, something I know I'm often searching for, yet always so hard-pressed to name. So with that, I'm going to start sharing my photos from this time. This first photo was, I think, one of the very first ones that I shot in this time, and not many people were wearing masks. This is probably late March, early April. And I decided to jump on my bike. I had a couple hours break from work, and I just, for some reason, headed out toward the Verrazano Bridge. So I live in Carroll Gardens, and I went through Bay Ridge and Sunset Park to get to the bike path, which you see here. And this is near where I live. This man is named Ashetti. I call this Ashetti and his angels. He's actually a man I've come to know over the years. He takes care of the cats on Columbia Street. And to me, this is just such a beautiful representation of the resilience that I see in New York. And of course, it's Shetty's wonderful spirit as well. He has a mask that my friend Susie made for him. He has 2 masks that he wears sort of tied around his neck. And this is a more recent shot. Again, this is on the bike path on the going toward the Verrazano Bridge. And I just love this image, I think for obvious reasons, but you'll see a little more of this lovely sibling couple in the presentation. So here I'm going to start talking a little chronologically. This I came across, my dad lives in Manhattan, and a few times a week I try to bike there from Brooklyn and go visit him. And this was, I think, the first time during the pandemic that I did that. So this was probably March 17, March 18, something like that. And, or maybe it was a little later, but it was at the time when people were really starting to think they should wear masks, but there was no masks anywhere. Nobody could get any. And I passed this in the West Village. This was just on the sidewalk that somebody had placed this here, and it was filled with these t-shirt masks. It was just such a beautiful gesture. And again, late March, early April, you can tell she's all bundled up. This is in my neighborhood. So this is on 2nd Avenue, and I think this is when I really realized it was important to be shooting, because I know a lot of photographers were staying out of the fray, but I was riding by on 2nd Avenue, and I spotted this long rectangular coffin, and the trucks were closed at that time, and there was nobody there, and that car wasn't there. And I thought to myself, as I said in the reading that I just did, was that a coffin? And I actually convinced myself that no, that was somebody moving, and that was their entertainment cabinet. I couldn't possibly believe that I was seeing a casket related to the pandemic. So I kept riding, and something made me stop and turn around. And when I did, this man was there. The truck was open. He explained to me that it was a volunteer group that he was a part of. They are called Janaza, and Janaza means sacred funeral rite. But it's they're a Muslim volunteer group to help the Muslim community, the funeral homes, with the overflow of bodies they were getting because of the pandemic. So he and a group of friends bought 2 refrigerated trucks and outfitted them as sort of makeshift mobile morgues. So you can see in the top left corner there, that truck was filled with this shelving that they would just pick up the coffins and slide them in.
Karen, when you
Yes.
first recognized that,
Yes.
what does that really do to you? I mean, bodies are in there, shelving as if they were carrying boxes, and you just stumbled upon that.
It was difficult. I think actually a few days before, on that same ride where I just showed the little teddy bear with the mask, I had seen that refrigerated truck, which now has become part of that tent camp in the West Village. And that was the first refrigerated truck I had seen. And I remember, and there it seemed more likely because it was next to a hospital. And I remembered this like shooting pain in my heart. This is real. This is really happening. And that was quite hard to shake off. And then when I encountered this group, it was a little difficult because I have some other pictures where you can see there's several of these volunteers, and they did not want me photographing at first. And luckily, this man, who was very kindly, explained to me what they were doing. And then I explained to him that, I wanted to show this, that it was really important, and they were doing such a great job. So I posted a little Instagram story with the whole series of photos if anybody's interested. But yeah, Frank, to answer your question, that was when I realized this shit is real. Excuse my language. It was a very tough moment. From there, I went to the hospital and I photographed a few workers outside the hospital, and it was then that this is coming back that night, that same day, with another view of those trucks, the mobile morgues. And then after that, and after photographing in the hospital, it was really, I found solace hanging out with all the people that were hanging out just beyond the Brooklyn Bridge, almost to Coney Island. And this is unusual to see a Hasid man wearing a mask at that time. None of them were. Again, this was very early on. This is another very first picture of mine from this series. These are all within the same couple of weeks. I'm going to say the first 2 weeks of April. But I think it was, I never spent a lot of time in this area, and it takes me about 30, 40 minutes to ride there, but it became my obsession, and it still is. The light is luminous, and there's people of every ethnicity and culture together there.
You know, I have to tell you,
Hasidic
Karen,
family.
I
Yeah.
used, as a kid, I used, or a young adult, I used to run there with my dad, and forever
Wow.
now you've changed this this view. That's nice.
It's incredible. I can't believe that it took me this long to really spend time there. And I don't know if people in the New York area remember, but the first couple of weeks of lockdown, the weather, we had some just incredible, we had our first beautiful spring days. So
Karen,
here's a,
I'm sorry, Karen, you're always asking permission to shoot everybody?
no, not always.
Not always? Okay.
It's a mix. I sort of feel it out. Not everybody's happy. Certainly the Muslim mobile morgue volunteer group was not happy at first. I think as a photographer, as a street photographer, that's, you know, you're always asking yourself, should I, shouldn't I? There's a lot of people I know that just go for it, but I always have a small inner conflict before I start shooting. This was, I had actually ridden my bike out to Westchester one day with a friend to see, we wanted to visit the cemetery where Malcolm X was buried along with Thelonious Monk and other luminaries. And we rode all the way there. I had both of my cameras. I didn't really shoot much. And then coming home that day, back home to Brooklyn over the Brooklyn Bridge, I took this shot. And I love it. I love that you can see the clock. It's a full moon. I don't know if people can tell that. And the way this man looks is, you know, we see a lot of this gaze. I think one thing the pandemic has done is it's made us all really reflective. And that's one of the positive things that have come out of it. This was one of the hospital workers I met early on. His name is Goldie. And I remember he said to me something that I hadn't thought of, and it's really come to bear. But again, remember, this was very early on. I think this was April 2nd, April 3rd that I took this shot. And he said to me, you know, what people don't realize for the healthcare workers is there's going to be this huge flood of psychological disorders, the things that we're all seeing. It's just going to be really tough. This was on my ride. I just stuck it in here because I love how it says pay here. And I feel like in some ways, for better or worse, we're paying right now for a lot of the way that we've lived. So here's those wonderful brothers, sisters couple that I found. This is one of the first shots that I took of them. And I kept seeing them. I saw them 3 different times. The first time I saw her by herself, and she just whizzed by like an angel. And I thought, oh my God, why didn't I look up sooner? I have to find her. And then she found me. So one thing I want to say about shooting down there during this time is I've always wanted, since I started shooting in New York last summer, I always am looking for these shots where I can get the different cultures together and just show how more or less we're living in harmony here in Brooklyn. And so I took this shot. I was so excited. And then a few minutes later, the Hasid man, the large Hasid man there on the left, walked by, and I tried to get an even closer shot of him with this Muslim couple. And he very sarcastically, snidely said to me, oh, you should let me smile at least for your picture. because the Hasid community famously does not like to be photographed. And I said to him, oh, but you know, what I'm trying to do is I would love to get you with this couple because I'm trying to show how we all live in New York together. And then he genuinely smiled. So that made my day. And here again, this is an Indian family in the foreground with the Hasid community in the background. Everybody's out right now. It's been my dream to get all these groups together in one frame. It's really heartwarming. I love the light in that child's eye. What's that?
Sorry to interrupt. Has this changed how you photograph the whole situation around COVID, not being able to get close to people, keeping social distance? Are you using different lenses? Eleanor had asked if you are shooting with maybe a longer lens than you're traditionally used to shooting with?
No, I don't own a long lens. I have 2 fixed lenses. I don't get closer than 6 feet though. I'm wearing a mask, and I often ask people, you'll see there's another image coming up where someone wasn't wearing a mask. I asked them if they had a mask, and I asked them to put it on. But I'm at least 6 feet away from these people here. Nobody's asked me to move away, except for there was one Hasid group in Prospect Park getting out city bikes, and they were angry at me for photographing. But I was pretty far away from them. I think maybe, Cliff, I've taken more wide angle shots where I'm more distant too. Like certainly that shot I showed earlier that was very luminous with the Hasid family flying the kite. That was more distant than I would normally be, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, so here's the image I was talking about. I don't know that you can tell this woman's pregnant. And they liked that I was taking their picture. Her dress in color was the same pink as the sky, but she was not wearing a mask. And I said to her, do you have a mask? And she said, yes. I said, please put it on. This was also still early in the first half of April. So now you can take a picture and everybody's wearing a mask, but at this time it wasn't. I would say maybe 30% of the people were wearing masks. She took off her mask for a kiss. Somebody posted, I read somewhere that they weren't shooting because they missed like the romance and the intimacy between people. But I actually found it even more so, or it seemed more precious to me in some way. So here, this balloon caught my eye, but then I realized that there was this baby in a baby carriage, unattended. And I had no idea, I couldn't figure out who it belonged to. But again, you've got the Hasid man, the family, and the woman through the trees, and another person framed on the right. I don't know if it was the light or the moment or the pandemic, but I just, things are just looking so achingly beautiful to me. This is a wonderful man I met in Prospect Park. And I loved how there was that woman on the right in the American flag. So another story that's happening in New York, and I have a small series on this too, is this was before it was making the news, but the sort of over-policing of certain communities and under-policing of others. And when I took this shot, some of the people that were here were screaming at me to turn around and take a shot of all the white people in the park who were not social distancing. And actually, I tried to do that, but I didn't, because I wanted to juxtapose it. In that moment, it wasn't happening. But certainly since then, I've seen that this is very true. And this is another thing that's been happening. This is in my neighborhood. I live in an old Italian neighborhood, and these are my neighbors that are lighting off fireworks at night, and they've lived there forever. And some of the newer neighbors have complained. And that night, one man complained, and after I took this shot, they got into a full-on war with him, the old neighborhood versus the new. It was pretty interesting. So as beautiful things are, it's still New York. We still have our tensions. And then this is just a fun photo I snapped yesterday, actually. Just, again, I love that there's a Hasid family, some African Americans roller skating right through Korean wedding picture. And then the shoes there on the right. I mean, it just delights me to no end that we're all living together here like this. And I'm ending just with some more hopeful shots. Oops. This is my last slide. So these are 3 frames from my ongoing Cuba project. I've been going to Cuba. I think I've gone 20 or 21 times in the last 4 years, photographing, and I'm trying to make a book with the photos and my poetry. So I just wanted to show that briefly. And if anyone's interested, you can certainly find it on my website.
That is really beautiful, beautiful work, Karen. Thank you so much. The, I mean, after working, I mean, and the project continues, right? I mean, as long as we're in this crisis, there's more work to be done.
Absolutely.
Right. And so where do you go from here?
With this project?
With this project, you know, with the virus project, like, what do you go with a not with an agenda? Do you go with an idea? Will you go back to, you know, the Verrazano Bridge? Will you go back to that area, or do you go to different areas? And why so much of the Hasidim, or just that it's because it's close to where you're living?
Why so much that I photograph them, or why so much that they're there?
Yes.
Well, I photograph them because they're there. So
okay. Right.
Yeah, I didn't set out to photograph them, although I think like a lot of people, they compel me, and ordinarily it's hard to photograph them. They really don't want to be photographed, and I don't really want to disrespect that wish. But for whatever reason, again, in this time, I find that people are more willing and more open to be photographed, to interact with. I mean, I can't say that every single time, but certainly more than usual has been my experience. And then to answer the first part of your question, I definitely have just fallen in love with this area, although if my job allows, my day job, which may end, then I hope to get out to other areas. But I think I might keep it Brooklyn. You know, I might just keep it the borough of Brooklyn. I moved here 7 years ago from the East Village, and I'm still on my honeymoon with it.
Right. You're one of us.
Karen, so just I want to read you a few comments because people are loving it. And you know, I'm a big fan. I love your work, and it speaks to me. I always see that, and I tell you this, that you shoot with your heart, and it's really beautiful to see that. And it's just an honest way to capture what's going on right now. You have a few comments now. I think she may be biased, but Karen or Nancy Allen is saying very, very moving photos. Karen Haskins saying, thank you, Karen. So beautiful. The stories these photos make them so much more rich. Such heartfelt feelings. Absolutely gorgeous from Melissa. Beautiful Karen from Giselle. Someone was saying that they see angels everywhere in your photos. You just have a lot of really beautiful comments here. So it's just, I wanted to share that with you as well. And I also want to let people know that you did give a presentation on that Cubo work that you shared in your last slide. And that was a stunning presentation. So we do have that on our website as well. If people are curious about that, just go to www.projections.live and you'll be able to see a video recording of that presentation as well as this one. We'll be posting this up in a few days as well. So
Karen, we thank you very, very much for presenting once again. And as you have, another body of work, the invitation is out there all the time.
yeah,
Thank
keep
you
up the
guys.
great
Thanks
work.
so
Thank
much
you
for
so
having
much.
me.
So we'll take another short break, and we'll be back with Drew. We'll just wait for Cliff.
All right, we are back for our last presentation. Just bring this up here. Get Drew back on board.
One thing that's sort of interesting, listening to Max and Karen about them referring to the people that they've shot, that getting the audio piece of that is really, really compelling, and that's sort of what we're doing with our video submissions. To hear what people think and hear what people are saying, on the streets doing what they do. Yeah. With that said, we have the great one, Drew. You're up, Drew.
How's it going, guys? Thank you all so much for tuning in, and thanks so much to Frank and Cliff for having me. And both Karen and Max, it's truly an honor to speak alongside both of you. That was incredibly touching work and really heartfelt. So it's great to be able to present alongside of you. So I'm gonna jump in and share my screen. Can you all hear and see me just fine? Is this working?
Yep.
Cool.
Yep, we can hear you.
All right. Cool. 1 second. Should be coming up with the presentation now, yeah?
There you go. You're good.
Perfect. And all right. So for those of you who might not be familiar with me, I'm a New York City-based photographer, portrait and lifestyle photographer, and I've spent the last 6+ years in the city as a full-time freelancer. I live in Clinton Hill, Brooklyn, just south of Williamsburg. I've done a lot of work revolving around the music and entertainment world. And to start, I just wanted to give you a small taste of some of that work that I've shot over the last couple of years. And I'm just working with 2 screens here, so apologies. This is Quincy Jones. I photographed this in his record label's office, just outside of the freight elevator, which happened to be the only place that we could actually fit my backdrop across the hallway. So ended up shooting that there. Here's R.L. Stine, who is the creator of the Goosebumps book series. This was a really, really cool shoot for me, as I was a massive fan of his books growing up. I shot this just north of the city in Westchester at an old mansion where I was shooting marketing photos for Masterclass, whom he was doing a class for. I scouted out this hallway and I set up lighting in a way that just felt really goosebumps to me. So it was, to me, a really great success. This is Ruby Rose. She's an actor who starred as the first openly lesbian TV superhero on a show. I think it's on like the CW called Batwoman.
Yeah, Drew, who were these shoots for?
All different people. I can go back. Quincy Jones was for the Associated Press.
Okay.
R.L. Stein was for Masterclass, the online teaching platform. They do classes with everyone from like Annie Leibovitz to Gordon Ramsay, all sorts of people. Uh-oh, did something just disappear? Oh, there we go. So I generally shoot for a mix of commercial advertising and editorial clients, just depending, but generally speaking for brands. And I'm just gonna get rid of, oops. Ruby Rose was also for the Associated Press. This is a hip hop artist named Mick Jenkins. I shot this at Manhattan's Bowery Ballroom. This was shot for Red Bull. I've done a lot of work for them over the years. This is a satirist and radio host and author, David Sedaris. Shot this up in the Bronx at a university.
Wow.
Misty Copeland, the prima ballerina. This was shot at the Baryshnikov Art Center in Manhattan in Hell's Kitchen last year. David Byrne of the Talking Heads. This was just a really, this collaboration was up there for me. It still is to this day. I did a lot of research for this shoot, and I thought that a simple mannequin arm could be a cool prop to bring along. I'd watched a lot of interviews, read a lot of articles about him, and it was based off of an old photo I found from a photographer named Chalky Perkins, I believe, from the early 80s, where David was sort of pulling at his skin and his face, and I showed him those photos that he, I don't think at this age necessarily wanted to sort of pay homage to anymore, but there was another album cover that he had done with St. Vincent, another artist, where they each were wearing prosthetics. It was a Beauty and the Beast theme. He had on this sort of prosthetic coming down from his chin, and Annie St. Vincent had another prosthetic. And I just saw this weird idea of like bringing in a mannequin arm that just felt very David Byrne to me. And in this particular frame, he was sort of pushing the hand into his cheek, which just makes it all the more eerie. So to me, that it just felt like it was really him in a nutshell. And yeah, definitely keep this one close to my heart.
So Drew, when
Yep.
you come up with an idea like that, right? There's got to be a point where I'm jumping all the way in, or maybe it's not a good idea, right? What is, how do you go about convincing somebody that maybe this is a good idea?
It's doing your research. That's how I approach it anyway. It's knowing who you're going to be able to do something maybe a little off the wall with or a little quirky with. You can look at someone else and get a sense that they're probably going to want to do something a lot more straightforward. And, but at the same time, you do want to push the envelope. Some of these are shot editorially, and most of these I have a very limited amount of time. With David Byrne, for instance, I had about 10 minutes. With RuPaul, I shot this particular setup in about 1.5 minutes. Literally, I'm not exaggerating at all. So it's a matter of, doing my research, knowing a bit about the talent in front of the lens, and figuring out the best way to approach it, because of course I do want to do something that goes beyond the normal headshot, if you will, something that actually speaks volumes and says something about them and tells a story, which is not always a successful thing to capture, but it's definitely what I strive for.
Great.
This is Mark Ronson, a music producer. He did Amy Winehouse's Back to Black, and he's done a lot of work with Lady Gaga and a ton of other people. This was shot in a Manhattan recording studio last year for Miller Beer. This was one of those things where he was kind of breaking down the making of a song that he had worked on all different instruments, including at the soundboard. So this was great in that I was documenting him in his element. So it not only was successful for the brand, but also really told the story of who he was, because he was where he feels most natural. Whenever I'm not shooting client jobs though, or running the business side of things, I really try to make an effort to shoot as much as humanly possible. Personal shoots have proven to be really valuable for me for so many reasons over the years. They push me to stay behind the camera, most importantly, which I've really found to be the best solution to any creative stagnation or personal struggle that I've ever encountered. They also really give me the chance to work through new concepts, experiment with lighting, and fill in gaps in my portfolio with work that I want to get hired to shoot that I maybe am not at that current moment. So this is a little bit of my personal work, and then I'm going to jump into a series that I have been shooting during the COVID pandemic. This is my buddy Andrew, another fellow photographer, Andrew Tomasino, who this was in his pickup truck in Pennsylvania about a year ago. My buddy Mike Grippy, another photographer. I like to work with my friends a lot because it's easy and they're willing and able, especially other photographers, because they know what you're after and they can play into it really well. But Mike, aside from being a great photographer and surfer, is also a great skateboarder. And this is him skateboarding by a sanitation depot in Bushwick. We didn't spend too much time there. It was pretty stinky, but we got our shots and moved on. This was shot in Topanga Canyon, just north of Santa Monica, on the side of a road, just a test shoot. So these are all just personal shoots of mine. This was on my old rooftop in Greenpoint, Brooklyn. This is a model that I found on Instagram. His name is Hamza Sar. He actually, at the time, was working in an Apple store, and I found him on Instagram, and we shot this in my studio a couple years back.
Yeah, Drew, tell me the process there. You saw him on Instagram. How did you connect with him?
I send a direct message, or I send a direct message initially, and I ask if I can send them an email because I really kind of hate getting reached out to for jobs on Instagram. I mean, it's okay to get that initial inquiry, but I would rather get like an actual email. That way I can organize it and keep track of it and all that. So I'll generally say, hey, I'm a photographer. I'm looking to do a test shoot and I would really love to work with you. Would you mind passing along your email and I can send you some more information. And then usually I'll have a phone call with them or have a couple of emails back and forth. And, you know, depending on what I'm doing, sometimes I'll put together a bit of a mood board or treatment. So kind of like the most formal version would be kind of a PDF explaining what I want to do along with visuals that I'm trying to go after. That tends to be more for commercial clients. But if it's just a personal shoot, I'll usually just send a bunch of JPEGs and say, hey, this is what I'm kind of looking to do and play with in the studio. In this case, it was with a model named Yves, another guy I found on Instagram, and who another friend had photographed actually. And I reached out and said, yeah, I'd love to do something with some color and motion. And it took a while to kind of nail him down, but he came by the studio and we experimented and ended up with this.
Great.
This was out in Joshua Tree in California. I borrowed this Plymouth Valiant from a friend of mine in LA. Rented a trailer. So this is a bit of a production for a personal shoot, but I rented a trailer and an SUV and had these two models from an agency in LA, and we all sort of drove out to Joshua Tree for a couple of hours, and we stopped at a few other spots as well, but this was sort of as sun was setting, and this was without any permits. We just sort of winged it, but we did not run into any trouble, so that's a success. This is my friend Kezi. Kezabon, she's another great photographer and director in New York, who I know you're a friend of, Frank, as well. So I shot, this is
former presenter as well.
Exactly. This was part of a series that I shot. I guess it was the winter of 2018 into early 2019, and that sort of, for me, generally slow part of the year from December through February. And I came up with this idea to shoot a project called Creatives at Home, just sort of dialing into my community that I'm a part of, and reached out to other friends who are artists of various types and photographed them in their homes and studios. This is a friend, Dwayne Brown. He is a dancer, an incredible dancer here in New York City. And I shot this in my studio in Brooklyn as well, actually on the wall that is behind me today. This was a scenario where we photographed some more quote unquote normal photos. And then towards the end, he just happened to mention offhand, hey, I bought these like shiny gold stilettos with me. Is it cool if we do something with them? And like the photographer in me, like, what am I going to say to that? Like, of course. So he put them on, and he's wearing like a black jockstrap that he would wear dancing. So it basically looks like he's nude. But, that's a pose that I know I couldn't do. And dancers are just incredible to work with. And it's been really amazing to do a lot of tests with them over the last couple of years. And this is
Drew,
the same
they're asking
guy.
if this was, sorry, was that natural light? Was that studio light?
That was studio light. I believe
Okay.
that was shot with like something like a 5-foot octabank, either a 5-foot or a 7-foot. But yeah, so not natural light.
So
But I
most of your
do,
photos are controlled light for the most part?
you know, it depends on what I'm doing. If I'm working in the studio, more often than not, I am lighting these scenarios. But at the same time, if I'm doing something that's more lifestyle driven, whether that's for myself or for a client, doesn't matter whether it's editorial or advertising. If I'm shooting something that's outside and, you know, maybe more lifestyle driven, that tends to be a lot looser. And, you know, oftentimes in those cases, I'm not lighting at all, or I'm waiting for the right time of day. If I have the ability to do that, to be able to work with the best light of the day. But that's not always possible. And sometimes you have blaring overhead sun and you make some moves and you incorporate some lighting or some type of soft boxes or something to flag the hard sun off of the talent and work with that. But it really just depends on what I'm doing. But I really love the shoots where I get to mix both something that is produced and possibly lit alongside something that is more of a kind of documentary or journalistic approach. My background before any of this more kind of formalized portrait work that I'm showing you was a music photographer. I grew up in northern New Jersey, just outside of the city, and I was photographing bands at a lot of clubs that are no longer there when I was 14 and 15 years old. And that was sort of how I learned the basics of photography, and then moved into more, you know, working with bands backstage or on tour in recording studios, those sorts of things. And I sort of sharpened up my journalistic instincts. So it's nice to be able to balance jobs when balance shoots when I get to do both of those things, but it's fun to tiptoe into both. And this is that same dancer as I mentioned. I think about 6 months after that last shoot, just really playing with some really dramatic color. This is a friend, Ebony, who I worked with on a shoot for a Nikon campaign, actually. I shot probably 5 or 6 years ago at this point, and we've worked together a handful of times since, just on personal shoots. This was nighttime in Chinatown, and that light on her is actually the red light from a fluorescent pawn shop sign. If you're familiar with Chinatown in New York, there's this prison right over there next to a park, and there's a city block that's just full of like pawn shops and loans and all that sort of stuff. So, or it was a bail bond shop, I'm sorry, not a pawn shop, but nonetheless, it was the light from the store that was lighting her. And, you know, this photo, these 2 photos and a handful of following frames were all personal shoots actually shot earlier this year, of course, pre-pandemic. I've spent a lot of time at my studio ironing out some weird techniques that I've wanted to play with, along with lighting and just collaborating with a lot of new talent in that time frame. This is Nicole Ross. She's a member of the U.S. Olympic fencing team. Also reached out to her on Instagram and, you know, had her by the studio, I think in January or February, and just had her in her amazing fencing uniform, which was so fascinating to me as an outsider, and got some really cool frames of her.
It's amazing, Drew, the range of your work. I mean, from that studio portrait to natural light to porn light is just spectacular.
Thank
really
you
great.
very much. Thanks.
Really
It's nice to be able to play with all of those different things and you know, feel good. You know, I want to be able to put myself in any situation and be able to come out with something that I'm proud of. But it's I'd be lying if I said that always happens, but that is certainly the goal. So I try to experiment as much as I can and be comfortable in as many different environments, photographically speaking, as possible. This is my buddy John Caspito, another fellow photographer. Shot this in my studio right before we got locked down here in New York. My friend Catherine, who's a model here in New York, also shot in my studio. And this was my last client shoot, which was on March 5th of this year. I spent the day photographing the new CEO of a major credit card company. And this is a test frame from our first setup with my assistant, Brian. This is not the CEO. No CEOs look this cool, but this was my assistant that day, Brian Magufog. And this was a test frame of him standing in for the CEO. So this has been a really strange couple of months, and being in New York City has certainly been no exception to that. As a photographer who works with people, doing shoots during this time feels near impossible just based on the nature of what I do and my proximity to others. The first couple of weeks of lockdown in New York was really scary for all of us. And the day-to-day goal was literally as simple as stay away from everyone you possibly can and do your best to stay healthy and to stay active to help fend this off if you do come across this, any symptoms. Further, as an asthmatic, I've had asthma since I was a kid. The thought of getting COVID was certainly even more concerning, especially as the weeks went on and hospitals in my area became more and more overwhelmed. At the same time, trying to stay creative in an unprecedented time like this is so, so important to me. It helps to keep me grounded, helps to fight off anxiety, and keeps me inspired, which is really a challenge right now. As the curve started to flatten in New York, my girlfriend and I started to take long walks every day around our neighborhood in Brooklyn and noticed that the 7 p.m. cheers for medical workers really started to pick up. And I don't know if that's the same in every city. I just spoke to a colleague in London, and he had mentioned that the cheers were only one night a week. So I don't know if it's every night a week in every city across the country, and I'd be curious to know if that's the case or not. But in any case, in New York and in my neighborhood in Brooklyn, every single night at 7 o'clock, people do cheer. So one day I decided to take a camera along, and I spent the next several weeks embarking on this project.
So, Drew, this is a little bit, I'm sorry, this is a little bit out of your comfort zone, right? You know, not setting up lights, you know, little photojournalistic.
It's definitely, it's interesting, right? I don't have control over the situation, which is tough for me to let go of sometimes, coming from a strong lighting background. But at the same time, if I were to show you, or you looked on my website, if you look on there, there's an all access portfolio, which is a lot of my work working with bands backstage, you know, at music festivals and in recording studios and all that. And so to be able to like pull back out my journalistic instincts, I think was really nice. It's a challenge because I can be on a block where the sun is blaring down and, you know, maybe there's some really spotty light coming through a tree, and the person that I photograph, it just might not work because I'm not into it, technically speaking. And that's a tough thing for me to cope with sometimes. But this has been a challenge, but at the same time, it's nice that it enables me to kind of get back to my roots of doing something more journalistic before I knew anything about lighting. So it's been really great in that regard. And it's just, most importantly, just to be behind the camera right now is a really important thing. And for those of you who are wondering, this was all shot with a 70 to 200 millimeter lens. So I am not close to these people. And of course I'm wearing a mask, but you know, I'm walking around the street and just trying to kind of snipe out whatever photos I can find.
So do you find like you're cheating on yourself? Like, what is it like from an emotional standpoint? Like, wow, look at me. Like, I don't have the bank light, you know, I don't have anything going. And of course the shots are terrific, beautifully composed, all of that. You know, like, you know, what's playing in your head?
Really just figuring out a way to document a moment in time. And I'll speak about this in a couple of minutes, but just to photograph something that feels positive. And to me, that is really important right now. Not that I have manic depression or anything like that, but it's been a really tough time, not only for New Yorkers, for everybody around the world. But I just find it really tough to maintain a positive outlook, especially a month ago when everything was completely crazy in New York and it felt like a complete and utter ghost town, and you were afraid to get close to anybody. And this was just a way to try to document something, anything with my camera. So I don't feel like it was cheating on anything, or it just felt like, look, this is what I can do right now. This is all I can do right now. I had other thoughts about setting up a portrait studio of essential workers, something like that. And that's something I'm still working on. I was photographing some essential workers last week in Manhattan. That hasn't completely come together yet, but over the last month or so, this has been what I have photographed, and I spent a couple weeks working on this, and it's all I knew that I could do at the time safely. And, you know, like any personal project, you have no idea what it's going to be until you actually jump in and you start to produce that work. So for me, it was just sort of a test, and let's see what happens. And, you know, here we are. So I don't know if that fully answered your question.
No, it does.
Cool. So plenty of blocks in my neighborhood and surrounding neighborhoods are loud when you walk down the street, but they really completely lack any sort of visual element, as neighbors often cheer from inside of their apartments. And oftentimes these are big co-op or condo buildings, and you can't see anybody at all. So you can hear the cheers, but you can't visually see anyone, which obviously photographically doesn't really work. And on top of that, the cheering only lasts a couple of minutes per day. I would see anywhere from like 1 minute to 5 minutes, just depending on the energy on that particular block. So if I find myself on a quiet block, I've completely lost the opportunity to photograph until the next day. And that's happened 3 or 4 days where I've been on a block that's completely silent, not a single person is cheering, and I sprint with my camera, you know, around the block to around the corner, around a couple corners to find the next block over, and it's still silent sometimes. So it's been a real challenge just because of the compressed amount of time that I have to document this. Despite the challenges, though, this project has not only been really creatively fulfilling for me, but it's given me a renewed sense of connection with my community. In some ways, I actually feel more connected with my neighbors than I ever have. And I think it's forged new bonds amongst many people who may have not ever known each other just a couple of months ago. And most importantly, I think it's a real historical document of the times. So we've all spent the past couple of months in various degrees of isolation. And as I said, Frank, I just felt it really important to just showcase some positivity. I'm not one to, you know, shoot self-portraits of myself in isolation, as some people have done and done incredibly well. I need that positive balance to kind of lift me up and get me through this. But witnessing this resilience in my community firsthand has really given me a lot of hope. And it showed me that I'm in fact part of a community, despite the size of New York City.
The one word that you just said, documentation, I think that's really, really important historically. Taking these images, you know, what you and Karen have done and so many other people, you know, to give us a context 20, 30, 40 years from now, what we did.
I agree.
Right? I think that's really important.
I think so. And, I don't blame anybody or look down anybody who has not picked up their camera during this time period. I think it's incredibly difficult to do for so many different reasons. I think you can have every excuse not to do it, but I don't know. I kind of feel lost without taking photos for an extended amount of time. And this has really helped me personally, selfishly, to get through this because I feel like I'm able to give back and showcase this in a way that I think resonates with a lot of people, and in a way that shows something that's really palatable and not overly dark, which I just think is like a bit of a breath of fresh air at this point in time.
That's great.
So I also spent a couple nights outside of the Brooklyn Hospital Center in Fort Greene, Brooklyn, right next to Fort Greene Park. I know there was an article probably 2 months ago at this point in the New York Times about how hard hit this hospital was in particular. But in any case, it was really an uplifting sight to see not only the public, but FDNY fire trucks, ambulance, and police cars stopped in front of the hospital with their sirens blaring to show their support for our healthcare workers. Police and EMT vehicles essentially just blocked off the street for about 10 minutes, and they do this every night. They still do this. They fly down the block with their sirens blaring, like they're on the way to some crazy emergency, and then just pull up to the hospital, stop their cars in the middle of the street, and get out and start cheering.
Wow. And while you're shooting this, do you think to yourself, it'd be great if I had video of this? You know, how does that hit you?
Absolutely. Video would be fantastic. But with video comes the need for good audio, and it's a whole different game at that point. I would have loved to approach this with a cinematographer friend, but I mean, it's one of those things where like anything that I would love to collaborate with somebody on, then it's like, okay, well, how do we do this and stay socially distanced? And there's so many challenges that to me, it was like to walk to any of these locations with a still camera in my hand. I know that I can do that, and I have no excuses to not do it. So I was just trying to go about it as simply as I possibly could while actually getting it done.
Right. Just great.
Thank you. When I looked up at the hospital windows, there were medical workers on almost every single floor. There's probably 8 or 10 stories in this hospital, but workers were on every floor who couldn't make it outside for the cheering, but tried to join in on the celebration as well. And everyone would be looking up at them and cheering as well. So it was a really kind of mutual support system going on there. And this was kind of a really odd but uplifting frame that I came across. Or situation that I came across. There was a patient, I have no idea if she was a COVID patient or what, but there was a patient who was being released from the hospital right as the 7 o'clock cheer was going on. So she came outside, and this nurse who's grabbing her hand, grabbed her hand and was dancing with her because there was some kind of like R&B or soul music playing that somebody had blasting through a speaker. And this nurse was dancing with this patient as she was released from the hospital. So just a really kind of odd, but pretty amazing sight to witness in person.
Mm.
So what initially started as just a few people on any given block clapping for a minute or two has really turned into entire blocks coming together and doing their best to release any bit of pent-up negative energy for a couple of minutes every day. On this block in particular, I don't know if this is Fort Greene or Clinton Hill, but on this block, one of the residents happens to be a professional DJ, and every night he brings this massive, like 4-speaker sound system out in front of his apartment and DJs a socially distanced dance party for probably like 20 to 25 minutes every day. It's gotten to the point that neighbors actually put road cones at the end of the street to kind of shut the street down for those 20 minutes per day. And we've seen cops pass by, and I think they're cool with it because they see what's going on, and it's just such a fascinating sight to see. And once the music stops, after that 20-25 minutes, everyone sort of shouts their thank yous to the DJ and the family kind of putting on the entertainment, heads back inside, walks back to their home, and others at the same time yell like, see you tomorrow, same time, same place. So it's just this really cool sense of community that I had never witnessed before this. And it's truly become a highlight of the day and truly one of the most uplifting experiences that I've had in the last several months. This was a busy intersection also in my neighborhood in Clinton Hill on Fulton Avenue. It's primarily a commercial area, but there's a handful of people that have gotten together each night at this intersection to get passing cars to honk their horns.
Mm.
This is a bodega owner. He's from Bhutan, and he plays a traditional Bhutanese flute every night at 7 o'clock, along with the cowbells and the smashing pots and pans and all that stuff. This is his own way of celebrating the workers. And this block was silent just before 7 o'clock, and I really had my doubts if there would be much to capture on this block, if anything at all. Then probably at like 6:59, a man dressed as a unicorn and his next door neighbors in hot dog costumes came out of their apartments and started running down the block with cowbells. So it went from nothing to all of a sudden just everyone coming out of their apartments to see what was going on and cheering. So just a really cool coming together of the community.
So as you're photographing all these different images, do you get the feeling that the people themselves really need to do this?
I think so. Everybody is trapped inside. And for those of you who are in New York as well listening, you certainly understand this. But for those of you who are elsewhere or in suburbia or in the country, we're trapped essentially in our apartments. Most of us don't have the luxury of having, our own rooftop or outdoor space of any sort. So, we have our 5, 6, 7, 800 square feet, whatever it is, to ourselves. But that's really it. And it's been really difficult. That's why my girlfriend and I have really made it a point to go out for at least an hour walk every single day. And we've happened to go out around this time to not only to capture this just because it's a beautiful time of day to go out, but because it's important to stay active and it's important to just get outside. But I think not exactly sure where this project is going from here. I'm sort of figuring out how else I can document this pandemic. I think I'm sort of starting to move beyond, photographing people standing on their front steps cheering. I think this is a pretty complete project to me at the moment. But yeah, definitely check out my social channels and website and all of that. Keep up, and I'll update on there whenever more new work comes about. But that's about it for me. But thank you all so much for your time and hanging in there. And would love to hear from any of you if you have questions.
Yeah, I mean, the reviews are play by this work. Really, really great. We're thrilled, and that is also a standing offer for sure, Drew. As you have another body of work, we'd love to have you come back and show us more.
Great.
It's too important of a story to just now, right? And but do you think, as you're sitting there now and you hear, do you have an imagination what I might want to do, or does the situation come and then I'll jump in? Like, how do you, now you have this photojournalist
I
body
do
of work.
have some thoughts. I don't have anything that is fully fleshed out yet, but I'm a little reluctant to share the full scope of this idea, but because
that's fine.
fully
I don't
there
want
yet.
to. No, keep it to yourself. I don't want to have. I don't want to hear from you later that I made you say something.
No. I think that it's really important. Obviously, healthcare workers have been covered by photojournalists, portrait photographers, many other heroes in the community, especially in a city, but in any community that have really helped to keep that community together. Those are, as I think you alluded to earlier, the FedEx guy, the person that's the WAP, the local, all of these people who are not necessarily, but at least in a metropolitan environment, without them, we would literally fall apart. So there are many other people who have held the city together along with the medical workers, and I think that they're really important to highlight as well. So I'm currently figuring out how best to do that.
You've opened up everyone's mic, so if anyone else wants to jump in now about anything, now's the time. The one thing I want to share about, I mentioned this to beforehand. What everyone should be watching out for these scams by somebody through Instagram, and it was really, really I mean, it was this close, but made me stop just before you went too far. And the old adage, if something appears to be too good to be true, it probably is. So watch out for those things. Anyone else have a question, a comment? Please just jump in. Cliff?
Sorry, I signed off for this for a second. My internet is not the best over here. But yeah, we want to keep this a little bit more open. I am kind of monitoring the chat room during the presentations. We do try and ask a few questions during it. Let the presenters go through the work, but we want to open up questions for each presenter after the presentations, but also at the end, if there's anything that people want to share, things that people want to discuss, things that they want to see during the next presentation, that kind of a thing. You can always reach out to us, but feel free to just mention it here too, right? When we did this back in New York, we had a social aspect to this, and we want to keep it that way. So while we don't have a bar right now, and we don't have a way to kind of hang out and kind of interact with each other, we do want to keep it as a community and keep it open. So feel free to ask anything. Feel free to share any comments about any of the work, or not even about the work. Just share what's going on if you guys want to, and we're happy to open it up to anyone that wants to do that as well. You just feel free to unmute yourself. If you know how to do that, there's a microphone on the bottom left-hand corner. And we can keep that as an open invitation too for next time. If there's anything that you guys want to see or hear, or other presenters that you want to hear from, just send an email our way. Reach out to Frank, reach out to me. You guys can always check out that website as well, www.projections.live. You'll see all the work there as well.
Yeah, and if anyone wants to present or knows somebody that I should reach out to present, please send me a note. You know, we're always looking for terrific work, terrific talent to present. So, you know, that's a standing invitation for all.
Zave says, my wife has been trying to mute me for years. Yeah, isn't it nice to be able to get a whole group of people together and just at a click, just mute, mute, mute. That's every New Yorker's dream right there. But honestly, if you guys do want to share anything, feel free to do so. And that's up to you, Frank. We should mention the next event is on June 10th.
Yep, and we have Timothy Fadek and Kevin Steele and Carol Drunsfeld who will be presenters. So we're thrilled about that. And we don't know what state Cliff will be in at that time. He could be anywhere. Today, you should all know he's coming from Cody, Wyoming.
Yeah.
And running the show.
So I'll spend the next 2 weeks trying to find a better internet connection for you.
Yeah, no, it was all good. So thanks everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Good night.